Hello, college football fans, and welcome once again to the SEC Yesterday. And today, I'm your host, Bird LaCroix, and this will be episode 8 of our Young Podcast series. And we'll bring out our special guest for this week's podcast in just a few minutes. But before we do, we're going to discuss our featured game of the week, the Florida Gators versus, as Keith Jackson might put it, the Georgia Bulldogs. And they're going to play for the 95th time this weekend in Jacksonville, Florida. Many of you know that series as the world's largest cocktail party. Jacksonville dropped that title as the official title in 1988, and they've recently tried to muster up a new trophy and title for the series, that being the Okefenokee Oar. And I don't know how that's taken off, but as you may or may not know, the Okefenokee Swamp borders both Georgia and Florida, so they're trying out the Okefenokee Oar as the title or the trophy that is presented to the winner of this game each year. So let's take it from there and delve into a little more of the series history. 94 games. Georgia has won 49 of those games. Florida, 43, with 2 of the games in this series ending in a tie. The largest margin of victory in the series for the Georgia Bulldogs occurred in 1942. They beat Florida 75-0 that year. In 1996, Florida defeated Georgia 47-7. That is their largest margin of victory in the series. The longest winning streak, interestingly enough, both teams have 7-game winning streaks in the series, those being the longest, tied for the longest. And the Florida Gators have won the last 3 games. Last year, they defeated Georgia by a score of 24-10. Now, as we look a little bit more closely at the two schools' football history, we'll see that Georgia claims 2 national championships and the Florida Gators claim 3. Georgia, 14 conference championships. Florida, 8 conference championships. Georgia has 802 all-time wins in its football history, while Florida has won 713 ball games. Georgia, 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Herschel Walker, you may very well remember, you probably do. And the first one was Frankie Sinkwich back in 1942. The Gators have 3 Heisman Trophy winners, all quarterbacks. The first one was the head ball coach, Steve Spurrier. The second is protege, Danny Werfel, and the most recent, many of you also remember, was Tim Tebow. A couple of other interesting notes on the series. Georgia has 317 NFL draft picks, and Florida has 339 NFL draft picks, with the Georgia having 32 first-rounders and Florida having 52 first-rounders. And I don't know if we'll have any come out of the schools this year, but we'll find out later on in the NFL draft next spring. So now it's time to bring on our special guest. His name is David Waters, and he's known as Gator Dave on Twitter. And David is the creator and host of the Gators Breakdown podcast, and we are happy to have him with us on the show today. Hello, Dave, and welcome to the SEC Yesterday. And today it's great to have you on the program tonight. I appreciate it.
I'm glad I could join you and talk some a game that's really, really close to me is Florida, Georgia.
Now, tell me something about that. I understand you grew up in Georgia, and now obviously you're Gator Dave, and you're a big fan of the University of Florida. So tell me how all of that transpired and how you wound up as a Gator.
Yeah, my dad was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was born in Jacksonville. And then my family and we moved to Georgia when I was a young kid, and grew up in Georgia. So with my dad being a Gator, I had no other choice. It didn't matter. I was raised to be a Gator, and I wouldn't have it any other way either. So, but being raised in Georgia, it had its fun going into that. I'm 34 years old now, so I got to grow up in Georgia on the good side of the rivalry. You would say I got to go through my grade school years and my high school and college years of Florida dominating Georgia. So I have a lot of bragging rights to my friends that I grew up with, and all my best friends are Georgia fans. So growing up in Georgia, being a Gator fan, I got heckled, but when it was all said and done, when this game rolled around, I had the bragging rights the following Sunday, Monday after, and of course the year after to the game was played again. But it's all in good fun. We have some fun with it. Like as I said, all my best friends are Georgia fans, and we have a good time with it. We know how to have fun with this game, and we tailgate together for the game and come down here for years, and it's a good time. And with that, it was only in Georgia, but it was only an hour and a half north of Jacksonville, so it was southeast Georgia. So it's not that far. We got to come down here to Jacksonville and have some fun for the game. So it's a game that's really close to my heart, and being that way and being able to come down here and enjoy the festivities, there's just nothing like it.
Well, I think many years ago, around 1988 or so, they tried to get rid of the name "the world's largest cocktail party," but that's what I grew up knowing it as.
Yeah.
I think that term originated in the 50s, didn't it? And it stuck around for a while, and they have tried to get rid of it, but unsuccessfully to a degree. So tell me about your earliest memories of the series and some of the biggest impressions you had of the series back during that time, if you don't mind.
Yeah, like I said, I'm 34, so I grew up in the Spurrier era, and that's my earliest memories of it. I remember the Fog Bowl where Eric went crazy, and Florida calls a timeout right before Georgia snap, and Georgia, I believe, scored a touchdown that play, but it was called back because Florida had called a timeout, and Florida ends up winning that game. And then you, of course, remember when Spurrier went to Athens, and it was a big deal to him to hang half 100 between the hedges. So you can't forget about that. But it was kind of unique because the teams would play the home and home, and Florida won both of those. Florida dominated the 90s in the series except for 97. That's another game that sticks out because that was my first time where I knew football, and I knew what was going on with the game of football, that Georgia had beaten Florida. So I remember that one very well, as well, with Jim Donnan as head coach for Georgia there. But then just going through those years, and Steve Spurrier retiring in 2001, going down to 2002. And Georgia comes in undefeated, much like this year. And Ron Zook in his first season, Florida's struggling, and they screen pass them to death. And Florida comes out on top and upsets Georgia, who really, that was their only loss of the 2002 season. So, it's been a game that's had its ups and downs. So, if you're the favorite, that doesn't necessarily automatically, you don't automatically win just because you're a big favorite. Some games that really stick out, and I named one, but the personal favorite was 2002 there, and being, it wasn't Florida's best year, of course, but being able to ruin Georgia's year and being able to be their only loss of that season, that was a lot of fun. It was the last time the game was played at night as well in Jacksonville. They don't want to play this game at night, as you mentioned. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party. There's a lot of tailgating on, and it's just a little bit safer if you have that game at 3:30 and not a night game. So I think CBS and the SEC helps each other out there and keeps that game at 3:30. Every year. And I guess one of the games that hurts the most, if you want to look at this game, is probably 2012. Will Muschamp's second year. Both teams come in highly ranked. Florida's undefeated. Georgia only has one loss, and Florida loses that game, and it was their only regular season loss of that year. Held them out of the BCS, where they had a chance to go to the SEC championship game and play Alabama, and then maybe go on to play Notre Dame in the national championship game. But that game, really, really hurt. It was the first loss of the season, as I mentioned, and Florida was also close, and Jordan Reed's going in for a touchdown, and Jarvis Jones strips him before he goes into the end zone, and that one really, really, really hurt. It was just on the cusp of something happening there. But then, a few years later, Will Muschamp comes in his last year and runs up and down Georgia for about 400 yards. That was just a couple years ago, and Jim McElwain's come in now and has won 2 straight under his tenure, and we'll see if he can continue the streak against a very, very good Georgia team coming into Jacksonville.
Yeah, one of the memories, I'll take it way back to about 1966. One of the first really clear memories I have of the game was Florida had just beaten my Auburn Tigers. Steve Spurrier, as you might remember in Gator history, had just kicked a field goal right at the end of that game to beat Auburn 30-27. And what was a great game. And Auburn didn't really have a great team that year, but they gave Florida everything that they could muster. But Steve insisted on kicking that field goal at the end, and broke my heart when they won that game. And of course, he went on, as you know, to win the Heisman Trophy that year. But They couldn't get it done against Georgia that year. I think it was the only game they lost. Is that right? That year?
Yeah, because that's one reason Spurrier does not like Georgia.
Yes, yes. It derailed an SEC championship, I do believe. And then the Gators didn't win one, I guess, until Spurrier himself became coach, the old head ball coach in 1991, I think it was. And then, of course, he went on to a, 11-1 record in that in the series.
Yeah, his only loss was in 2000 or 97. So
in 1997. And now, speaking of the series, there's a lot of off the field stuff going on around it this year. It seems like that way if I kind of compare our Iron Bowl, Auburn and Alabama, to the Georgia-Florida game, the largest cocktail party. And there's always, something's going to come up. I don't know whether people leak it out, how it gets out. One side leaks out on the other. But this one seems to come straight from the horse's mouth. Jim McElwain, on some off-the-field issues, has been talking about death threats and his team. And that's, hey, I remember some of that stuff going back to the Suge Jordan and Bear Bryant era, too, of football in Alabama. But now that stuff has come up this week, what's your take on that? How do you see that? What's going on?
It's a very weird situation, and it was from the get-go. A head coach announcing in a press conference that he's got death threats. For one thing, it did seem like the university had no idea this was coming. This was a surprise to I think everybody when it came out. It was Jim McElwain didn't help himself. Now teams can pretty much negative recruit on this. You bring it out publicly like this, and first of all, to go back and look at it, it's not a good thing, the death threats. It's taken a little bit too far. As I mentioned, talking about this game in particular, Florida, Georgia, about, I was raised in Georgia. I got Georgia fans, they gave me a hard time, but that's all it was. And it was never nothing more than that. And, death threats are definitely taking it too far. And you don't threaten the coach or his family, the players. This is just a game when it's all said and done. Yep. We can sit here and talk about it. We can have fun. You can be disappointed after a loss, but there's no place for threatening it. So, there's two things there of looking at it. Should it have been said publicly by Jim McElwain? That's questionable. Probably not, but not at least before he talked to the university about it. And they can follow it up. Was there? From what we heard, Jim McElwain said he didn't turn it into authorities. So there's kind of a couple ways to look at it. Is and the weird thing with the university coming back out later Monday night after the fact is they talked to Jim McElwain and he offered no further comment. So that really raises a question mark of why doesn't Jim McElwain really want to expound on it? Really, why doesn't he want to expound on it with his own university? Why doesn't he want to tell them more details? So Jim McElwain on Wednesday will have the SEC coaches teleconference, and he'll get peppered with that question. He'll have local media on Wednesday again as well. So there's really no running away from this, and I think we'll find out more when Wednesday rolls around. But as far as the early in the week, it's kind of a question mark of what's really going on, and it's a weird scenario.
Yeah, it is a weird scenario, and I hate to see it happen to anybody, anytime, in any place. But unfortunately, it does, and those things oftentimes turn out, to never amount to anything. But when you hear that, you got to listen and you got to take it seriously to a great degree, and that's a shame that it has. But let's look at maybe some more off the field stuff, but with the players. And now I see some of the Gators have been talking about Eric Fromm from Georgia, and who was the players that said, well, anybody can throw a slant route or something. I just noticed that on Twitter or something today. Yeah. So what's your take on the jawing off the field this week?
Yeah, I'm never one to, if they want to talk, let them talk. Here's the thing. You got to back it up when you're on the field. Yeah. If you want to talk it, go ahead and talk it. Put it this way, if that's what Georgia needs to be hyped up and needs to be ready to play this game, then they're kind of already in trouble. Bulletin board material, it doesn't really do much to me. Those usually, it doesn't really have an effect on the game to me. Now, personally, after the first, drive or so of the game, it's more about who's the better team that day, and that's the team that will win. I don't necessarily buy into, we played harder because that guy on the opposite team talked trash all week. I'm a firm believer in the better team usually wins. So, control a game? Can it control a player or two or something? Yeah, maybe. But yeah, as I said, when it's all said and done, I think the better team usually wins. So it's a rivalry game. You're going to have this. Florida players. You thought they probably would have learned their lesson last year when they talked so much trash against Tennessee, and Tennessee ended up coming out on the top of that. But Jim McElwain has never really held his players back from speaking their mind, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah, that's true. It's a different day and time, like from when I grew up, and there is a lot of jawing going on, but players do motivate themselves differently. It's kind of entertaining for those out here of the casual
sure.
fan, but it's at least something to get your attention. But what about on the field? Now, how does Florida stand as far as the injury situation going into the game?
Yeah, the early in the week during Tuesday's practice and Sunday they had it was kind of weird because of the bye week, so they did have a Sunday practice and then they had a Monday, Tuesday practice as well. They do get Tyree Cleveland and Kadarius Toney back, and Tyree Cleveland's their deep threat at receiver, and you could definitely tell in the last couple games against LSU and Texas A&M that he wasn't on the field, and their deep threat was kind of non-existent for the Florida passing game, and Cleveland he's that guy. You remember him in the Hail Mary against Tennessee early in the season where he caught the game-winning pass. And then later against Kentucky, right before halftime, he catches another deep pass and sets up a Florida score before halftime. So he's a deep threat then. Kadarius Toney in the Wildcat. He's been a weapon there, and he's a true freshman, electric. He makes something happen every time the ball's in his hands. And, it looks like Florida's going to have two of their biggest weapons on offense back for the Georgia game in Kadarius Toney and Tyree Cleveland. So, it's a welcome relief for Felipe Franks, who really struggled passing the ball down the field without Tyree Cleveland. And the run game was still working with Malik Davis and LaMichael Pirine, but, the Wildcat wasn't necessarily used as much with Toney and being on the sideline. He had his good runs against LSU and put in position. He got hurt late that game. He didn't play the Texas A&M game. So, we'll see how big of an impact he can bring. Florida against A&M didn't run the Wildcat a lot. Dre Massey had had one carry there. So, Florida kind of went away from the wide receiver screen, and Tony's been involved in that a little bit too. So, with these guys, the playbook opens up just a little bit more, but this Georgia defense, is one of the nation's best, and Florida's going to need Cleveland. They're going to need Toney. They're going to need running back Malik Davis and LaMichael Pirine to do something. And I've kind of been a firm believer where this Florida offense needs to lean on the run game, but against Georgia, that may be hard figuring that out.
Yes, it might be. I'm hoping it's going to be a good game, and speaking of good games, I think we have a couple or three pretty decent ones coming up this weekend in the SEC. So why don't we right now go into some picks, and we'll save the world's largest cocktail party for last. How does that sound?
We can do it.
All right. We'll lead off with Arkansas and Ole Miss in Oxford. How do you see that one, Dave?
Shea Patterson, goes down.
Yeah.
Going to be pretty difficult for Ole Miss. Kind of trying to figure out what they got to do at quarterback now. But Arkansas, is not looking too good either. And what Brett Bielema is bringing to the table there. But with the first game, trying to figure out that situation at quarterback for Ole Miss. I think I'll lean Arkansas, to rally the troops, get something going, maybe get some of the hot seat talk of Brett Bielema going away, and maybe Arkansas pulls that one out.
I'm kind of in the same camp as you on that. I mean, I think both teams are really struggling, and neither team is very good at all. But then once Shea Patterson went down, I said, man, what are they going to do? And I know there's a little bit of talent over there, but and the game is at Ole Miss, but I also think this is the time that Arkansas gets back on track just a little bit, and maybe take some of that talk away, like you mentioned, off of Bielema. We'll go now to Lexington, Kentucky, where the Wildcats host the Tennessee Volunteers, and we got another fella firmly on the hot seat. A lot of people thought he might not have a job as we speak tonight, but he does, as far as we know. And so what do you think about Tennessee and Kentucky?
Well, how did Kentucky bounce back? They thought everything was going right. They only had the one loss to Florida, and that was kind of controversial of not covering receivers. And we'll see how that turned out. They only had the one loss going into Mississippi State last week and got blasted there. They thought they were on the right track. So how did they bounce back against? They kind of thought they had everything, all their ducks in a row, and then really disappointing showing there. But then, no more disappointing than Tennessee. And I think I saw the stat. There's been 14 quarters now since they've scored an offensive touchdown, and that's just unfathomable in the SEC right now. Yes, we know the teams are tough, and we know the schedule's tough, but beating 14 quarters without a touchdown, that's kind of inexcusable, especially with the way Butch Jones is recruiting. Recruiting's not been a problem at Tennessee the last few years, and that's part of the issue of why all the hot seat talking. And they find a way to lose games, and Butch has all these sayings, and fans are tired of it. And it's two teams here that are, I think, reeling kind of in two different ways. Can Kentucky bounce back, and can Tennessee get something going? Kentucky can kind of smell the blood here. Can they kind of put the final nail in the coffin of Butch Jones? It looks like now if Tennessee didn't fire Butch Jones, they may be waiting till after the season. But a loss to Kentucky here, maybe that's the final straw before they pull the plug on Butch. It just kind of seems. Not if now, but when that's going to happen. So, with the way it's going and just the way it looks, I think Kentucky bounces back and just, keeps Tennessee on the downward trend right now.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that one also. It's the game being in Lexington, I guess that does give Kentucky a little bit of an edge. But I thought they had a better football team than what they showed in Starkville last Saturday night. But Nick Fitzgerald did a tremendous job in that game, as he always does. But Tennessee, they have found new and creative ways to lose, and they've found ways to lose badly. And I don't see them crawling out of the hole. As a matter of fact, Kentucky is favored in this game, and I believe that's the first time in memory. I saw an article on it. I can't remember exactly how long it's been since Kentucky's been favored over Tennessee, but it's been a long, long time. But I think this is the year that they can get it done. If it's not, when will they? So I'm going to go with the Wildcats at their home place also. And we travel now to on the road to East Hartford, Connecticut, where the Missouri Tigers are traveling to play UConn, and former Auburn offensive coordinator, now head coach Rhett Lashley up there for the Huskies. So what do you think about this intersectional game?
Yeah, I know probably a little bit more about Missouri than I do UConn, so it's kind of where it goes there. And can Drew Lock can that offense can continue to put up some points? They gave Georgia probably one of the most difficult games Georgia's that defense has had so far this year. So and then going up to UConn, as you mentioned, it's kind of a weird road game for an SEC team, especially this late in the year. With all these SEC games going on, and but with Drew Lock and that passing game, I think when it's all said and done, they make a statement. Can they continue from the good trend of bouncing back against? I think they played with Idaho last week, I believe.
Yes, it did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So put up
scored 68 or something.
Yeah, there you go, and an inordinate amount of points there, and it'd probably be close. It's a weird kind of game at UConn there. So Drew Lock in that passing game is probably just a little bit too much. As they get prepared for Florida next week.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think they will light it up, and they'll come home with a pretty easy victory. Let's see. We got a couple of teams here that are trying to make a little noise. One team that was on its way south. One team that's trending upward a little bit in the east, South Carolina and Vanderbilt. And this one is in Columbia, South Carolina. What do you think about the Gamecocks and the Commodores?
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina's got it going on, especially against Vanderbilt lately. Kind of a couple things there. I believe they've won 8 straight over Vanderbilt, which is didn't really think about that, but kind of a weird stat going on there. Didn't think it really would be like that. And also Will Muschamp, 4-1 versus Vanderbilt. So it's Muschamp's done a pretty good job of beating the teams he's supposed to beat this year, and even the first game of the season against NC State. You got to look what Jake Bentley does at quarterback, and I know they're fighting some injuries as well, especially bouncing back from that Tennessee game where they won at the buzzer. But I like South Carolina here to kind of continue the wave right now. Vandy's struggling to run the ball so far this year. Ralph Webb just can't seem to get going, and ever since that nice start, they've kind of just with Alabama, now Florida, and a few more games after that where they just can't keep it going. Lost to Ole Miss as well. So, Vanderbilt just can't seem to get the traction when you kind of thought they were on their way after that Kansas State victory a few weeks ago. So, Will Muschamp in South Carolina, I think, gets the job done at home.
I'm in agreement again. I think South Carolina 5-2. I think they go to 6-2. They should win the ball game. Vanderbilt's been playing miserably, and South Carolina's certainly been more than holding their own. And the schedule looks pretty good for them ahead. The Gamecocks could be making a move. All right, let's see here. Let's take another one. A pretty big game now between teams in the West out at College Station. The Mississippi State Bulldogs go to Kyle Field to play the Aggies. What do you see there?
This was pretty tough. It has a chance to be. You don't see it too much in the SEC, but kind of maybe a Big 12 looking shootout here. I think you can maybe see that here. And I think the key stats here for Mississippi State. Only 3 sacks allowed all season. That's the fewest in the SEC. Man. And Texas A&M with 28 sacks, and they lead the SEC. So something's got to give there. And which team can come up? Texas A&M a couple weeks ago had a lot of success against Florida. I think they had 5 sacks in that game. So that they put the pressure on there. Florida fans, it was a game they could have won. But A&M found a way to make some plays behind Kellen Mond in the fourth quarter. So making plays with his legs. I really like the running game that Texas A&M brings too. But Nick Fitzgerald, I tell you, if he gets going, that's when that Mississippi State offense is hard to stop. But I think when it's all said and done, all the hot seat talk about Kevin Summers kind of quieted down a little bit. And I think with the game being at A&M, I kind of just like Texas A&M at night game there, College Station to be rocking. And I think Kellen Mond just kind of like he did against Florida makes enough plays to come out on top.
Yeah, it's Mississippi State has been playing really well, and A&M's hanging on. They're doing they're playing some pretty good football themselves, and I'm kind of leaning on College Station too, Kyle Field. I can't quite pull the trigger on Mississippi State, even though they played such a great game against Kentucky. They hammered BYU before that, but before that, Georgia and Auburn beat them mercilessly. And right. It's hard to say, but they are a decent football team. But I think Texas A&M is going to find a way to win in College Station when push comes to shove. And now that brings us down to the big one, the world's largest cocktail party. What is it going to take for the Florida Gators to win this football game, Dave?
It's going to take, I think the only way Florida has a chance in this is they have to slow down that Georgia run game. And I know that's kind of the obvious thing here, but, you got true freshman Jacob Fromm for Georgia. They're not asking him to make a lot of plays, but he can make big plays because of that Georgia run game behind Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. So, they get that run game going, and it's going to be really, really difficult for Florida to keep up. And, the Florida defense has been playing pretty well against the run the last few games. They've kind of turned it on the defensive side of the ball. So 83 yards given up to Texas A&M a couple weeks ago, 115 yards given up in the run in the last 3 games, and they're ranked 38th in the country right now, only giving up 143 yards in rushing. So like I said, it's getting better, especially coming off of 83 yards against a pretty good Texas A&M run game, but nothing like what they're going to see with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. So it's going to be shut down that run, make Jacob Fromm beat you, make him make passes that will march Georgia down the field, because he hasn't necessarily proved that he can do that. If the run game's not there, Florida's got some really talented defensive backs. Make him beat those defensive backs, and those receivers prove themselves as well. So that's the key, is for Florida to stop the run game. And probably on the other side of the ball, Felipe Franks is going to have to make a couple big throws, because I just like I mentioned earlier, Florida needs to be, from the rest of the season after the bye week, after looking at the team, they need to be about a 70% run team. But this may not be the week to try and figure that out against a Georgia defense that, tell you what, only giving up 92 yards per game on the ground this season. They've only given up, about 61 yards per game the last 3 games so far this season on the ground. So it's a team that's going to make you earn every yard. They like swarming to the ball. They don't give up a lot of big plays. So Florida's really going to have to just come out of this bye week. Did they get creative? What I'm kind of factoring into this game for these Florida coaches right now is we need to see some desperation, need to see some creativity. Get Kadarius Toney in the Wildcat and use some creative. Maybe use his arm a little bit. Do we finally see Malik Zaire a little bit with a couple packages? Not necessarily just because of Felipe Franks is struggling or not. Just can they get something going that we haven't seen on tape yet that can get going? We know Florida offense can have some success on the first couple of drives of a game when they can go in on a script and maybe they can get up early with there, but they have to improve in the fourth quarter. Severely outgained in the fourth quarter against LSU and Texas A&M. Can they figure something out in the bye week there? So a lot of things for Florida to figure out. But the best thing is, too, if you can stop that Georgia run game, make Jacob Fromm beat you, Florida's got a chance.
I think they do. I think they have a chance, and maybe a better one than people think. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to go against your Gators. I think Georgia will win this game. They'll pull it out in the fourth quarter. But we shall see. That's why they play the game.
Yeah, when it's all said and done, I'll lean Georgia as well. It's just Florida's struggling just a little bit too now to see them beat a team that's playing as well as Georgia.
Well, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, Dave, and I appreciate you coming on the SEC yesterday and today. This has been episode number 8. And tell everybody where they can find you out there.
You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, and on the Gators Breakdown podcast, you can follow us at Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook. We have a couple episodes a week just talking Gators, and it is a lot of fun. The podcast is about a year and a half old. Started it last football season, and it's gaining some popularity out there. So if you're a Gator fan and you want to check out some Gator talk, Gators Breakdown is the place to go.
Great. Thank you very much. And again, I've been your host, Bert LaCroix. You can find me on Twitter at Autull, Autull. My personal website, birdlacroix.com, with personal and sports blogs at campuspressbox.com. And then this is a product of Sports Hacks under the Campus Press Box flag. And it's the SEC yesterday and today. We do appreciate your listening. And